एंड वी आर लाइव। ठीक है, 2 सेकंड देते हैं ताकि यूजर्स आ जाएं। आई थिंक आना चालू हो गए हैं। ठीक है, कूल। सो हाय एवरीवन एंड वेलकम बैक टू लेमन्स लाइव सेशन, जहां हम बात करते हैं मार्केट के बारे में, देखते हैं स्टॉक एनालिसिस और सीखते हैं कुछ नया। मैं हूं संदीप चौहान और आज मेरे साथ हैं सचिन रेलेकर, हु इज अ सीनियर फंड मैनेजर विद एक्सिस एएमसी। वेलकम टू द सेशन सचिन सर।
थैंक यू।
ठीक है, तो आज के सेशन में सबसे पहले विल कवर ओवरव्यू ऑफ लास्ट बजट, देन व्हाट टू एक्सपेक्ट फ्रॉम दिस बजट, फिर इस बजट का डिफरेंट सेक्टर्स पर क्या इंपैक्ट हो सकता है इसके बारे में भी हम बात करेंगे। इसके साथ ही वी हैव सम क्वेश्चंस फ्रॉम आवर कम्युनिटी जिन्हें रिप्रेजेंट करेंगे लेमन के रिसर्च एनालिस्ट गौरव। सो सचिन सर, लेट्स स्टार्ट विथ लास्ट ईयर्स बजट। अच्छा, कौन से वो बड़ी बड़ी स्कीम्स अनाउंस हुई थी जिनसे कुछ सेक्टर्स को बेनिफिट भी मिला था? तो वो स्कीम्स कौन सी थी और वो सेक्टर्स कौन से थे? ऑल्सो लास्ट बजट में गवर्नमेंट ने एलटीसीजी को भी इंक्रीज किया था, तो उससे क्या इम्पैक्ट हुआ था मार्केट्स में?
Sure. See, last year was an election year, so we had two budgets. One budget was before the election, which was interim, and then there was a final budget, which was more of a year-long budget after the election. So we had two budgets. Actually, the difference between the two budgets was not much, but the major policy announcement actually happened in the second budget. The first is, the stance for this government, which is continuing now also, is very prudent and very balanced. I don't think that has changed for last 10 years and unlikely to change going forward also. So that prudence is very, very clear. Last year, we started with 4.9% fiscal deficit to GDP ratio. Actually, in the final budget, it was came down to 4.7. उसमें RBI dividend also helped the fiscal balance. And in terms of the important sector implications, which you asked about, I think that LTCG, which was 10%, without indexation benefit also, then it has went to 12.5%. So the major sector which were affected by that was real estate, was expected to affect by that. And also, of course, people's investment into the equities, bonds, etc. That all got one uniform treatment. So that was actually the major thing. Apart from that, automobile subsidies continued. The emphasis on the domestic manufacturing, for that the concessional tax treatment for the new investment continued. The PLI schemes are there. There was a lot of focus on clean energy as well. So last year, government focus on all these sectors continued. So there's a clear focus on infrastructure development. Clean energy is part of that. So all those things actually are continued. And at the same time, they also manage this fiscal balance quite well. Of course, some of the dividends, etc., from RBI also helped. So I think these were the major things in the last budget. Yeah, I think that was actually the main highlights which were there.
Right.
None of the sectors, like because the growth stance has been so strong, none of the sectors really had any negative implications per se.
ओके। अच्छा, हमने सर लास्ट बजट में ये भी देखा था कि स्किलिंग एंड एम्प्लॉयमेंट को सबसे ज्यादा फोकस मिला था, तो
Yes.
इससे कुछ सेक्टर्स को बेनिफिट भी हुआ था। वो सेक्टर्स कौन से थे?
So human capital focus काफी है. That's where I think they have used the money, as in it's not direct one to one, but whatever the RBI dividend which has come up, actually they have directed it towards that, where they are actually spending a lot of money on training, and the skill development which you talked about. So basically that creates employability of a lot of people, and that actually helps the sectors which requires not so highly skilled workforce also. So a lot of money goes into that training and development. So a lot of there are blue collar type of jobs which are required in several industries, services required, some of the low skill jobs. That's where this
Right.
money actually goes into it. So it's very actually unorganized, very large strata of population which get benefited by that. So that's what actually, it's a very widespread net which is gets spent on that. And it's basically directed towards, that's what actually termed as the human capital development kind of expenditure. So it has a very wider implication. So a lot of people does come under that ambit.
ओके, ठीक है। आई थिंक लास्ट बजट की काफी बात हो गई, अब आने वाले बजट की बात भी कर लेते हैं। तो इस आने वाले बजट से व्हाट कैन वी एक्सपेक्ट, क्या हो सकता है? जैसे कि कंज्यूमर डिमांड अभी बहुत लो पर है, जो कि
Hmm.
मार्केट फॉर रीजन है, तो क्या
हम्म।
गवर्नमेंट ऐसा कुछ एफर्ट्स डालेगी जिससे कंज्यूमर डिमांड वापस से रिवाइव हो सके?
देखिए, बजट को लेके नंबर ऑफ एक्सपेक्टेशंस आर देयर. ओके, आई थिंक सम ऑफ द कंसिस्टेंसी इन द थॉट प्रोसेस, because the same government setup is continuing. I think that expectation is quite rational. There will be, first of all, this budget also I'm expecting quite prudent and balanced like last year. So I think, in terms of what are the feelers which are there and what, so far the stance has been there, I don't think there will be much drastic changes into that.
Okay.
So there will be focus on capital expenditure, no questions about it. But up there, if you actually consider like the backdrop of this budget, there are two important things. One is there's a domestic slowdown which is there. Okay, at the same time, there are a lot of external uncertainties there. There is an election in US, and there's a change in the presidential regime over there, and there's a lot of change in terms of the way they want to look at their own economic policies, the trade policies, etc. So there are a lot of uncertainty around that, and we are not seeing like the directionally it is emerging, but it is not, we are not seeing the exact policies which are going to come. So I think that backdrop is need to be considered important, and therefore how the budget will take the view of those things is important. So one is domestic slowdown. So obviously domestic slowdown does affect consumption as well as the capex. So I think what we will perhaps look forward to is whether we will have some kind of front loading of capital expenditure, which will revive the cycle, because there are cyclical factors which are affecting the growth. At the same time, how these external uncertainties will shape, that also need to be taken into consideration. That is also will be one eye will be on that. So I think that is the main theme for the budget. I expect the budget to be as in the consensus, rather whatever number of people I spoke on macroeconomics and specialist and expert, the consensus view is this will be a balanced, this will be quite prudent budget. I think they will maintain a very prudent fiscal deficit of, I mean, the broad number is like 4.5%, and that will help the government to keep bringing down the debt to GDP ratio as well. So that is on the broad numbers. In terms of consumption revival, which is actually quite slow, but I think that is also after effect of how the economy has been. So if the economic cycle revives because of the government spending in directly into the railways and defense and sectors which are they have direct influence, some after effect or what is called as a rub off effect of that also will come into the consumption. There could be, there's an expectation, by the way, can be something in terms of taxation changes at the lower end of the tax bracket. That
Okay.
we need to wait and see. But because there is also a focus on having a very balanced and a very good stance on the fiscal deficit, maybe the tilt towards the welfareism, so to say, may not be as pronounced. But yes, they will. It will be considered as to what can be done for the larger section of the people where they can benefit directly as well. So I think that is a that needs to be seen for sure.
ओके, आई थिंक आपने जैसे अभी मेंशन किया कि इस कमिंग बजट से मिडिल क्लास के टैक्स स्लैब में थोड़ा-सा कुछ तो डिफरेंस देखने को मिल सकता है। तो क्या ये
Exactly.
मार्केट को भी इम्पैक्ट करेगा? क्या मिडिल क्लास की पॉकेट
तो
थोड़ी-सी बड़ी हो पाएगी?
तो मार्केट को जरूर इम्पैक्ट करेगा। सी, ये जो एक एक तरफ है कि आपका फिस्कल डेफिसिट मेंटेन होना, दूसरी तरफ आपका डेट टू जीडीपी रेशियो कंट्रोल होते रहना और धीरे धीरे उसको कम करना, ये भी एक एवेन्यू है। वहाँ से द फिस्कल स्ट्रेन कम्स डाउन, एट द सेम टाइम इट ऑल्सो रिड्यूसेस द गवर्नमेंट बोरोइंग इन द मार्केट, which
राइट,
means there will be less pressure on the interest rates also, right? Which will actually create a good environment for the credit growth, which will help SMEs, which will help obviously the people who are part of that ecosystem, which is also going to revive some amount of velocity in the economy. So those things are actually a little longer term, and they are more healthier way of reviving the growth. So I think that also will be there. While changes in the taxation is something which everybody looks at because that is the very most often talked about it, but there are these other things which also start affecting the overall health of the economy, which also has a clear effect on consumption as well. So some of these things actually need to be understood from that manner, because last year, as I said, we are having a slower kind of growth, because also that was an election year, where which is a typically the spend from the government is slows down, because the focus is also on this election process. And after that, maybe they will actually look at front loading or upfronting the spend, so that the revival can come through. Actually, that is how we should look at.
ओके। सर आपने मेंशन किया कि इस बजट में टैक्स कट हमें लोअर ब्रैकेट ऑफ इनकम में देखने को मिल सकता है, तो ये कौन से इनकम की आप बात कर रहे हैं यहाँ पे?
So there are tax brackets, right? I mean, there are up to 10 lakh rupees, there are 15 lakh rupees, those kind of things are there.
राइट,
Whether, and there are two regimes of the taxation which are also continuing. Let's see, I mean, whether we'll migrate to only one regime, or we will have some kind of more relaxation on that, whether certain exemptions can be allowed, etc., which can give some kind of a relief to the people. But as I said, those may not be very large in terms of what can change, what can have effect in terms of the government's math per se, because that's a very large math. But at the same time, it might actually result into some kind of a sweetener for the people. But I think the focus, as I said again and again, I'm going back to that, is focus on having a balanced budget, very prudent stance on fiscal deficit. I don't think there will be a much of a change in that, because, as I said again, the backdrop is there is also a lot of external uncertainty.
राइट,
The lot of things are actually changing, and changing at a quite rapid pace at a global level, and because of the interconnectedness of all the economies and capital flows, etc., that also need to be kept in the context.
ओके। सेशन में आगे बढ़ें उससे पहले एक बार मैं हमारे व्यूअर्स को बताना चाहूँगा कि कल बजट को हम लोग कवर करने वाले हैं, लाइव बजट एनालिसिस करने वाले हैं। तो उस सेशन की लिंक भी आपको डिस्क्रिप्शन में मिल जाएगी। आप वहाँ जाके अपने रिमाइंडर सेट कर सकते हैं और हमें जॉइन कर सकते हैं। ऑल्सो अगर अभी तक आपने चैनल को सब्सक्राइब नहीं किया है, तो प्लीज़ चैनल को सब्सक्राइब कर लीजिए। ठीक है। तो आई थिंक बात हो गई है क्या हो सकता है और कैसे टैक्स स्लैब में थोड़ा-सा हमें कट देखने को मिल सकता है। ऑल्सो अगर देखा जाए कि ये कौन से सेक्टर्स होंगे जो कि मिडल कैप और स्मॉल कैप एलोकेशन के लिए अच्छे हो सकते हैं, तो वो कौन से सेक्टर्स हैं? सॉरी हाँ, कौन से सेक्टर्स हैं?
There are a number of sectors, right? I mean, first of all, I think what will continue is the focus on the job creation, right? That's where government is very clear ki new investment will be treated with a concessional tax rate. I think that is continuing. There are PLI schemes which are also announced outside of the budget, so they will continue. Therefore, the sectors which are into this electronic manufacturing systems, etc., which is a big part of merchandise export, is what been talked about. If we can become a part of those global value chains, etc., that is what government is also talking about. There are a lot of policies which are think tanks which are working on that. So I think those sectors are big part of the mid, small, as well as large sectors. There will be focus on defense expenditure, because last year defense expenditure was a little lower than what was budgeted. So maybe that will revive. So those are the sectors which are there. The subsidy schemes or the incentivization for electric vehicles is also continuing. There could be much more clarity on hybrid vehicles, electric vehicles, whether that could come out. Plus, because we are trying to revive our own manufacturing, and therefore the domestic export competitiveness as well. So, can custom duties on the intermediate products and goods can be changed and all? Those are the also clear points to look at. So large policies are there. Within that, there are these derivatives which are there. And as you're also pointing out, some of the changes or some kind of a sweetener on and at the middle or lower income levels can
राइट,
also revive some of the low ticket consumptions also there. Of course, the human capital development focus will continue. There is no question about it. That is also one more factor, which is a continuing kind of a thought process from in the budget making process. So I think anything allied to that, these are all the broader, and then from there we can draw like which sectors are there. So consumption related, low ticket consumption related, automobiles are there, manufacturing is there, defense I talked about, renewable energy is continuing to be very well anyhow, as in that capex is continuing. I don't think there will be anything as a I mean, there will be more supportive kind of policies for that, because energy transition is a need of the hour. So I think those themes are there, which one can look at.
ओके। ऑल्सो सर ठीक है, आई थिंक थोड़े हमारे व्यूअर्स हिंदी में भी हैं, तो लेट्स ट्राई टू बैलेंस इट।
Hmm.
गुड। अच्छा सर, ऑल्सो देखा जाए, ठीक है, आपने मुझे सेक्टर्स तो बता ही दिए हैं कि जिनमें अच्छा एलोकेशन देखने को मिल सकता है। ऑल्सो इज देयर एनी सेक्टर दैट इज लुकिंग अंडर वैल्यूड और अ गुड बाय, जिससे बजट के बाद जिससे बेनिफिट हो सकता है जिस सेक्टर को?
नॉट डायरेक्टली बजट के बाद ऐसे, बट फाइनेंशियल सर्विसेज इज वन, जहाँ पे वैल्यूएशंस आर क्लोजर टू देयर लॉन्ग टर्म एवरेज। मतलब मार्केट में बहुत सारे सेक्टर्स है, तो उसमें फाइनेंशियल्स में वैल्यूएशंस इतने ज़्यादा नहीं है, स्पेशली द बैंक्स एंड एनबीएफसीज में, जितने बाकी सेक्टर्स में है कंपेयर टू देयर हिस्टोरिक एवरेज। तो वहाँ पे थोड़ा एक वैल्यूएशन अपॉर्चुनिटी है। एंड अगर फिजिकल डेफिसिट और ये सब अच्छा हुआ, तो तो इंटरेस्ट रेट घटने की भी चांसेस काफ़ी बढ़ जाते हैं। और
राइट।
इसलिए आई थिंक दैट इज ऑल्सो वन सेक्टर विच इज, आई थिंक दैट इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट सेक्टर विच विल बी लुक्ड एट।
ओके, ठीक है। आई थिंक अब हमारे मेरे तो क्वेश्चन सारे खत्म हो गए, बट कम्युनिटी के भी काफ़ी कुछ क्वेश्चंस हैं, जिनको लेने के लिए गौरव हमारे साथ हैं बैक स्टेज पे। गौरव, वेलकम टू द सेशन।
हाय संदीप, हाय सचिन, थैंक
हाय
यू।
हाय।
तो हमारे कम्युनिटी में पहला क्वेश्चन पूछा है आशीष पाटिल जी ने, जो भी लाइव हैं। वो पूछ रहे हैं कि क्या बजट के अकॉर्डिंग हमारे इन्वेस्टमेंट पोर्टफोलियो को डायनेमिकली चेंज करना चाहिए कि नहीं?
देखिए, बहुत सारी चीज़ें होती है बजट, मतलब बजट इज अ कंटिन्यूएशन ऑफ द लॉन्ग टर्म पॉलिसीज। ओके, तो पोर्टफोलियो, जैसे कि मैंने बहुत सारी चीज़ें कही, मोस्ट ऑफ द पोर्टफोलियोज आर ऑलरेडी ऑन दोज लाइन्स, राइट? तो डोमेस्टिक ग्रोथ से अलाइंड जितने भी सेक्टर्स हैं, वो वैसे भी वहाँ पे रिप्रेजेंटेशन है। हमें ये देखना है कि कौन से सेक्टर में पॉलिसीज का सपोर्टिव नेचर ज़्यादा रहेगा, और क्या थॉट प्रोसेस सब जगह पे। जैसे हमने बात की, कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर पे बहुत बड़ा फोकस है, बिकॉज गवर्नमेंट ने कंटिन्यूअसली सेम चीज़ें कही है। रेलवेज हैज़ टू बी मच मोर स्ट्रॉन्गर एंड मच बिगर सेक्टर, टेक्नोलॉजिकली ऑल्सो एंड इन टर्म्स ऑफ द साइज ऑल्सो। Defense competitiveness and defense domestic manufacturing focus is clear. There is a clear focus on job creation in the economy, and therefore revival and more competitive and more scalable domestic manufacturing sector is there. So these are all continuing things, right? And we are anyway aligned, and anyway all the investor focus is there. So it's not about only for the budget you have to see. Now, what is changing versus last year or year back or something like that is the external environment has changed quite a lot. So, how budget actually accommodates those changes, and what kind of policies are there to address those kind of things. So, I don't think much will change in terms of the thought process or continuation of the themes which have been continued for last 3-4 years in terms of where the focus will be. So just for short-term reasons, should you tinker on the portfolios in a major way? That is not advisable. I think about it from a more longer-term themes, what themes are going to continue and what will sustain. I think those thoughts are quite clear and they are consistent also.
Sure. सर, जैसे आपने पहले भी बताया कि इलेक्ट्रॉनिक सेमीकंडक्टर मैन्युफैक्चरिंग में गवर्नमेंट का थोड़ा फोकस रहने वाला है, और अभी हमने
Hmm.
देखा कि अर्निंग्स के बाद उनको काफ़ी मतलब वो काफ़ी अभी थोड़ा-सा वैल्यूएशन के लेवल्स पे भी आए हैं। तो क्या आपको वो
Hmm.
एक अच्छा सेक्टर लग रहा है इन्वेस्ट करने के लिए, अगर, या फिर अपने पोर्टफोलियो में ऐड करना चाहिए इसे?
नहीं, सो वो तो है ही, मतलब देर आर नंबर ऑफ प्लेयर्स विच आर देयर, ओके, इन दैट सेक्टर। देर आर नॉट वन और टू प्लेयर्स, इट्स अ वेरी लार्ज सेक्टर। Secondly, the value chain itself is very very deep and very substantially large. अभी तक इंडिया में जो हो रहा है, and it is a phenomenon post COVID actually. Pre-COVID also these companies were there, but they are actually massively scaled up post-COVID, and only few companies are massively scaled up. There are a lot of companies which are still smaller; they are still not part of listed universe also. Plus, there is a lot of what you called about semiconductor value chain or the fab manufacturing, etc. That investment is also continuing, and And there is a clear intent that India should have a very large share of the merchandise export of the global share. So there's a lot of continuity and lot of distance to go on that theme. Now, having said that, when it comes to allocating capital from an investment point of view, it is also a question of, okay, what is the kind of visibility there, and what is the kind of valuation which is there, and how much of that is priced in. Now, that is one simple variation, simple equation. Apart from that, you also have to look at individual company. उसका क्या टेक्नोलॉजी एज है, किस तरह से वो कंपनी के टेक्नोलॉजी टाइप्स है, क्या उसका विजिबिलिटी है, कौन से वैल्यू चेन के सेगमेंट में उनका इन्वेस्टमेंट जा रहा है, तो आरओसी क्या होगा, या वो कमोडिटीज में सेगमेंट में जा रहा है, या वो वैल्यू एड सेगमेंट में जा रहा है, एंड क्या उसके पास वो एज है. सो वो सारी चीज़ें हैं. ऐसा ये जब अपन सारी चीज़ों को कंसीडर करते हैं एक एक करके, तब जाके द इन्वेस्टमेंट प्रोपोजिशन बिकम्स क्लियरर. बट जस्ट फ्रॉम if I have to keep it at a level 1 or simply first step level, so क्या इस थीम को देखना चाहिए, इस थीम को जरूर देखना चाहिए. उसके बाद ये सारी चीजें उसमें ऐड करके हमें उसमें सॉर्ट करना पड़ेगा कि हमें कौन सी कंपनी में कितना इन्वेस्ट करना है.
थैंक यू सर, थैंक यू फॉर द आंसर. एक क्वेश्चन हमारे लिए पूछा है नरेश जी ने, जो पूछ रहे हैं कि अभी आरबीआई ने एक लिक्विडिटी इंजेक्ट की थी 2 या 3 दिन पहले, तो क्या ये इंडिकेशन है कि गवर्नमेंट ग्रोथ के लिए चाहती है? और हमने ये भी देखा कि आरबीआई के गवर्नर चेंज हो गए हैं, तो क्या रेट कट अभी जो आएगा वो बहुत ही एक्सपेक्टेड है कि वो रेट कट होगा ही होगा?
सो जी, ग्रोथ फोकस में कोई अंतर नहीं है. ये तो एकदम किसी के मतलब देयर इज नो डाउट अबाउट दैट देयर इज अ ग्रोथ फोकस, एंड ऑल द थिंग्स आर डन इन अ प्रूडेंट मैनर. ओके, so we can it's one thing to say that there is a growth focus, and that does not mean we will actually lose any discipline on the fiscal balance also. We will have a good balance and good prudence on the fiscal deficit side, or the fiscal overall budget process. At the same time, the liquidity measures is there. That is something which is also a function of there was a deficit, and there was a deposit creation, and therefore the credit creation was like getting stalled a bit. So there is a liquidity injection, which is actually a part and process of RBI's functioning, which is continuing. Now, when you are talking about interest rate cut, there are 2-3 things which need to be taken into account. One is there is a government borrowing, which is a very large number right now, 57% debt to GDP ratio hai. So if you achieve fiscal balance, obviously the government need to borrow more will reduce, and therefore that fiscal deficit, the discipline you will continue to see. Now, when you're talking about interest rate cut, the another angle is there is a lot of external uncertainty which I talked about. See, so there is an implication on INR and dollar rate as well. So all those things will be needed to be watched and seen. So don't take it anything like a prediction which is 100% probability, but definitely there are rooms, and there will be this environment which will move in a right direction, so that there will be lower cost of capital for everybody, because that will revive the velocity of money in the economy. So that's how one should look at it. It's a little more dynamic than having a very clear one-to-one that interest rate cut is certain, not certain. That's one way to look at it. But just having a more credit growth also is a good for having some kind of a velocity, some kind of momentum in the economy.
श्योर सर. सर, पूजा जी ने पूछा है कि लास्ट ईयर जैसे कि हमारे लॉन्ग टर्म कैपिटल गेन्स और एसटीटी बढ़ा दिया गया था, इस बार भी ऐसा कुछ एक्सपेक्टेशन है कि कैपिटल मार्केट्स में ऐसा कुछ किया जा सकता है या फिर स्टेबल रहेंगे?
जैसे स्पेसिफिक प्रेडिक्शन करना बहुत मुश्किल होता है, बट वील हैव टू सी, वेट एंड वॉच फाइन प्रिंट में क्या होता है. दैट इज वेरी डिफिकल्ट टू सी.
दूसरा हमारा क्वेश्चन है कि जो अभी गवर्नमेंट है वो अपने डाइवेस्टमेंट टारगेट से थोड़ा दूर है, तो आपको ऐसे कौन से पीएसयू कंपनीज दिख रहे हैं या सेक्टर्स दिख रहे हैं जहां पे गवर्नमेंट स्टेक सेल करने की गुंजाइश रखता है?
No, so government as such has stayed away from doing the divestments in a large manner. One or two companies got, I mean, very less number of companies actually got listed, but they were very small also. As in the large companies, They are not listed much. So, but there is a government is sitting on a very large, as in the market capitalization of their share. If you look at the exact number, I don't have because market does change a lot, but that number is very large, right? And when I'm talking about fiscal deficit maintain करना है, that also is balanced to be balanced. इस सब में अभी भी government has not actually gone ahead and monetized some of these shareholding, right? So there can be number of prospects which can come. वो थोड़ा कैपिटल मार्केट के हेल्थ पे, वोलेटिलिटी पे या एपेटाइट पे भी डिपेंड करता है. अपार्ट फ्रॉम डाइवेस्टमेंट, व्हाट गवर्नमेंट कैन आल्सो लुक एट द ऑपरेशनल इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर एसेट्स जो है उनको भी वो मोनेटाइज कर सकता है, बिकॉज देयर इज आल्सो मीनिंगफुल एपेटाइट फॉर दैट. बिकॉज व्हेन गवर्नमेंट इज लुकिंग एट रिसोर्स एंड एक तरफ आपको कैपिटल स्पेंडिंग भी रिवाइव करना है, तो दिस एंड फिजिकल डेफिसिट भी मेंटेन करना है, तो दिस कैन बी अ वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट एवेन्यू विच दे विल लुक एट. So in terms of companies, there could be, I mean, they can look at lot of names there because government has number of companies which are listed. In certain cases, their shareholding is also large, although that is not a parameter to whether to divest or not. But that I think is something which I forgot to mention also in my initial remarks. That is also something government will look at probably in terms of what they are projecting for the year.
श्योर श्योर. और बाकी हमने ये देखा कि एफएमसीजी को लास्ट क्वार्टर टू में काफ़ी खराब रिजल्ट्स थे उनके, मतलब उन्होंने उतनी ग्रोथ नहीं दिखाई थी, जिस वजह से मार्केट्स ने भी उन्हें काफ़ी डाउन बीट किया. तो अगर आपको लगता है कि लोअर पॉकेट्स या फिर रूरल डिमांड में कहीं तेज़ी आ सकती है, तो क्या आपको लगता है कि ये सेक्टर एक अच्छा वॉच है अभी देखने के लिए?
हाँ, मतलब वो सेक्टर काफ़ी इम्पोर्टेंट भी है, बिकॉज कंज्यूमर कंपनीज काफ़ी हाई क्वालिटी कंपनीज होती है. उनके आरओसी आरओई रेशियोज काफ़ी अच्छे रहते हैं. ग्रोथ मिसिंग है वहाँ पे, जैसे कि शुरुआत में भी हमने बात की, थोड़ा कंज्यूमर वीकनेस तो ज़रूर है. अगर वहाँ पे रिवाइवल आते हैं तो ज़रूर वो सब भी देखना ही चाहिए. और वहाँ पे भी जैसे कि मैंने बोला कि ऐसे मतलब these are very high quality companies, but at the same time there are a lot of differentiated companies which are actually not having much of a competitive pressure also, and they're growing even in a slow environment. So if the environment revives, they will grow perhaps faster, and that can be a surprise. So it's a very broad scope to look at.
श्योर श्योर. ठीक है सर. तो इसी के साथ संदीप आप कंटिन्यू कीजिए, यूजर्स के क्वेश्चंस ले सकते हैं, यहाँ पे खत्म होते हैं.
अगर किसी यूजर का कोई क्वेश्चन हो तो आप पूछ सकते हैं चैट में. अभी तो मुझे कुछ क्वेश्चंस दिख नहीं रहे हैं.
तनवीर जी ने पूछा है, बट वो स्टॉक स्पेसिफिक है. वी वुड जस्ट लाइक टू पॉइंट आउट कि इस सेशन में हम स्टॉक स्पेसिफिक क्वेश्चंस कवर नहीं करेंगे. नेक्स्ट सेशन में या फिर हम आपको कमेंट्स में बता पाएंगे.
आई थिंक थोड़ा सा वेट करके देख लेते हैं कि अगर कुछ नए क्वेश्चंस आते हैं. लग नहीं रहा मुझे कुछ नए क्वेश्चंस हैं. तो ठीक है, इसी के साथ आई थिंक इस सेशन को हमें यहीं पे खत्म करना चाहिए. सो थैंक यू सो मच गौरव एंड सतीश फॉर जॉइनिंग दिस सेशन. थैंक्स टू ऑल ऑफ. अगर आपको कोई डाउट है तो प्लीज शेयर देम इन द कमेंट सेक्शन, और अगर आप चाहते हैं कि हम नेक्स्ट सेशन में किसी पर्टिकुलर सेक्टर या फिर स्टॉक का एनालिसिस करें तो आप वो भी हमें बता सकते हैं. अगर आपने अभी तक लेमन के ऑफिशियल टेलीग्राम चैनल को ज्वाइन नहीं किया है तो कर लीजिए, क्योंकि वहां आपको रेगुलर बेसिस पर मार्केट रिलेटेड अपडेट्स मिलती रहती है. Thank you so much for joining.
Investments in the securities market are subject to market risks. Read all the related documents carefully before investing.